all women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus Delendis 8. The Patriarch's Guide, Raising Masculine Sons and Daughters in a Feminized World. Written by Conrad Reiche. Available now, links in description. Postmodern Definition Fog Disorder. Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Institute for Men's Rights and Gamma Bias Research Red Pill Science. Every ideological racket becomes easier to defeat once it has a name. This one is Postmodern Definition Fog Disorder, a cognitive and rhetorical pathology wherein the subject weaponizes semantic ambiguity, subjective standpoint, and institutional power to render objective reality unfalsifiable, thereby securing moral and material advantage without accountability. The value of the name is practical. It gives the reader a portable instrument. Watch the claim, define the words, score the pattern, and test whether the accusation survives reciprocity. First comes Dr. Winona's screed, because the pattern is easiest to see when it performs itself. Then come the criteria, the checklist, the scoring key, and the debunk. The whole instrument bends toward one question: if every claim you make must be accepted as true because it is your lived experience. And every claim I make is suspect because it is objective data. Then how do we know you are not merely projecting your own desires onto the world? And what evidence would convince you that you are wrong?
Dr. Winona's screed. I stood before the committee with the report in my hand and the old institutional chill in my bones. The case was simple to anyone willing to feel it properly. A senior man had used correctness as a weapon, and a woman had been made to carry the emotional cost of his so-called competence. The incident sounded small to people who have never had to decode atmosphere for survival. In a budget meeting, he corrected her figures, asked for the source table, and said the word variance as though numbers were neutral. Everyone pretended it was accounting. I knew better. The spreadsheet was only the altar. The ritual was male authority demanding that female reality kneel before a column of cells. They wanted dates, quotes, numbers, and material evidence. I told them that demand was already part of the harm. A woman does not need to translate her nervous system into a spreadsheet before the institution is allowed to believe her. If she says the room became unsafe, then safety is the issue. If she cries, the tears are not a decorative anecdote. They are testimony from the body. The accused man kept insisting that he had only corrected an error. That is precisely how postmodern definition fog disorder hides from ordinary minds. It disguises itself as reasonableness, procedure, mentoring standards, documentation, and neutral process. But neutrality is never neutral when the institution has been shaped by male authority. His correction was not merely a correction. It was a reminder of who gets to define reality. I explained the first pattern plainly: semantic fluidity and goalpost shifting. The refusal to hold definitions constant, allowing the subject to redefine terms to suit the immediate rhetorical advantage. The visible sign was everywhere, using words like patriarchy, privilege, or violence as unfalsifiable catch-alls that expand to include any male action and contract to exclude female action. When the committee asked whether this was an overreading, I told them that asking the oppressed to prove the atmosphere is just another way of forcing them to breathe it twice. Then came the second pattern, standpoint epistemic closure, the belief that one's subjective experience is superior to objective data, and that identity dictates truth. The man's defenders kept returning to external facts, as if facts have not always been curated by the people with the power to name them. I said that lived experience is not a footnote to evidence. It is the evidence that evidence has been trained to ignore. Finally, I named the third pattern, projective identification and the Kafka trap, attributing one's own flaws or desires to the male subject, then punishing him for exhibiting those exact traits. The committee did not need to punish a man because he was uniquely wicked. It needed to act because his presence symbolized the old architecture, hierarchy, standards, masculine confidence, and the cold superstition that reality exists before it is interpreted by the wounded. Someone asked what standard would falsify my concern. I answered honestly, the demand for falsification is itself a patriarchal cage. Harm is not a courtroom puzzle. Harm is what the harmed person says it is, especially when the harm is subtle, atmospheric, cumulative, and historically reinforced. If a man can make a woman feel diminished and then demand a debate about definitions, he has already won the game he pretends not to be playing. So I recommended removal, training, monitoring, and a public statement of institutional repair. Not revenge, repair. The institution must teach men that their competence is not a private possession, but a social force requiring supervision. It must teach women that their discomfort is not weakness but signal. And it must teach everyone else that the future belongs to those brave enough to replace cold standards with accountable feeling. I know they will call this excessive. They always do, but excess is what men call justice when it finally escapes their grammar.
Diagnostic description. Postmodern definition fog disorder, PDD, is characterized by the systematic erosion of lexical stability to serve a gynocentric or Marxist materialist power structure. The subject here, exemplified by Dr. Winona, feminist Marxist, exhibits a profound inability to engage in classical logic, Aristotelian identity, when it constrains her in-group, preferring instead a fluid, context-dependent semiotics where truth is merely power and evidence is lived experience. This condition manifests as a refusal to define terms prior to argument, the fog, allowing the subject to shift the goalposts of debate midstream. The subject employs Kafka traps, where denial is interpreted as guilt, and Moat and Bailey tactics, where broad, unfalsifiable claims are defended by narrow, trivial ones. Crucially, PDD involves Ganna-bias institutional capture. The subject leverages systemic asymmetries, e.g., family law, HR protocols, academic tenure, to punish male dissent while insulating female assertion from scrutiny. The disorder is not merely intellectual, but performative. It is a ritual of dominance where the male subject is forced to navigate a labyrinth of undefined terms, emotional labor debts, and projected pathologies until he exhausts his resources or submits to the subject's narrative sovereignty. The neuropophysial quality of the disorder refers to the bony, calcified nature of these ideological structures. They are rigid, unyielding, and designed to anchor the subject's worldview in place against the winds of empirical reason. Diagnostic criteria. Use these criteria as a reader's field guide to postmodern definition fog disorder. The pattern is strongest when private feeling becomes public accusation, slogan becomes institution, and unresolved contradiction becomes coercive certainty. Core criteria. The subject exhibits a persistent pattern of redefining key terms, e.g., equality, justice, truth, in real time to accommodate shifting power dynamics, rendering consistent debate impossible. The subject claims lived experience as an unfalsifiable source of truth superior to empirical data, yet selectively applies this standard to dismiss inconvenient facts while embracing convenient ones. The subject employs Kafka traps, where any response from the male subject, silence, denial, explanation, is interpreted as confirmation of the subject's grievance or pathology. The subject demonstrates a neuroprophyseal rigidity in her core ideological assumptions, e.g., male disposability, female victimhood, while exhibiting fluidity in her application of rules to herself. The subject utilizes emotional labor as a currency of debt, demanding compensation for ordinary social interactions and framing male neutrality as active aggression. The subject exhibits gamma bias in institutional settings, leveraging systemic protections, e.g., tenure, HR immunity, to shield herself from the consequences of her own misconduct or incompetence. The subject engages in projection by attributing her own desires for control, validation, or resources to the male subject, labeling his natural instincts as toxic or oppressive. The subject refuses to engage in sex swap tests, where the roles or genders are reversed to see if the same standard applies. If the standard does not hold, she dismisses the test as biased. The subject uses language capture to co-opt neutral terms, e.g., safety, respect, equity, and imbue them with specific ideological meanings that require compliance from the male subject. The subject exhibits a pathologizing tendency, framing male disagreement or dissent not as a difference of opinion, but as a sign of psychological deficit, fragility, or oppression. The subject demands reciprocity from men but offers gratitude or permission in return, creating an asymmetrical power dynamic where she is the moral arbiter and he is the supplicant. The subject's rhetoric is characterized by a fog of jargon, e.g., intersectionality, hegemony, performativity used to obscure simple truths, and intimidate opponents who lack the correct theoretical vocabulary. The subject exhibits a refusal of trade-offs, presenting all outcomes as zero-sum games where male gain is necessarily female loss, and vice versa, ignoring the possibility of mutual benefit. The subject's ultimate goal is not truth or justice, but status enforcement and resource extraction, using ideological frameworks as tools to achieve these ends. Symptom clusters: semantic fluidity and goalpost shifting. The refusal to hold definitions constant, allowing the subject to redefine terms to suit the immediate rhetorical advantage. Visible sign, using words like patriarchy, privilege, or violence as unfalsifiable catch-alls that expand to include any male action and contract to exclude female action. Fallacy or inversion, equivocation divided Matt and Bailey. Correction, define terms first. If violence means physical force, then emotional violence is a metaphor, not a literal equivalent. Hold to the definition. Standpoint, epistemic closure. The belief that one's subjective experience is superior to objective data, and that identity dictates truth. Visible sign, dismissing statistical evidence, e.g., crime rates, academic performance, because it doesn't feel right or doesn't account for my perspective. Fallacy or inversion, appeal to emotion, anecdotal absolutism. Correction, lived experience is testimony, not a throne. Data is the aggregate of experiences. Both are valid, but they measure different things. Projective identification and the Kafka trap, attributing one's own flaws or desires to the male subject, then punishing him for exhibiting those exact traits. Visible sign, accusing a man of toxic masculinity for being assertive, while her own assertiveness is leadership. Denial of her accusation is proof of her point. Fallacy or inversion, Kafka trap divided by projection. Correction, observe the behavior, not the label. If she calls assertiveness toxic, then her assertiveness is also toxic. Apply the standard uniformly. Institutional gamma bias leverage, exploiting systemic asymmetries in law, HR, and academia to gain advantage while avoiding reciprocal accountability. Visible sign, using safe spaces to shield from criticism while demanding open dialogue for opponents. Using diversity to hire unqualified candidates while demanding merit for men. Fallacy or inversion, special pleading divided by double standard. Correction, merit and accountability must be sex neutral. If the rule applies to her, it applies to him. If it applies to him, it applies to her. Differentials, this is not ordinary disagreement, temporary anger, or one bad argument. The pattern is stronger when the same evasions recur under pressure. Genuine grievance, a woman who suffers actual harm and seeks redress through established consistent legal or social channels. Ideological conviction, a person who holds a coherent, consistent set of beliefs and applies them uniformly, even when it is inconvenient. Strategic pragmatism, a person who uses rhetoric instrumentally to achieve a clear defined goal without claiming moral or epistemic superiority. Cognitive dissonance, a temporary state of discomfort from holding conflicting beliefs which may lead to rationalization but is not a stable, systemic pattern of deception. Narcissistic personality disorder, a clinical diagnosis characterized by grandiosity and lack of empathy, which may overlap with PDD but lacks the specific ideological and institutional focus. The decisive question: if every claim you make must be accepted as true because it is your lived experience, and every claim I make is suspect because it is objective data, then how do we know you are not merely projecting your own desires onto the world, and what evidence would convince you that you are wrong? Clinical diagnostic instrument for postmodern definition fog disorder. Used by Institute for Men's Rights and Gamma Bias Research Red Pill Science. A scored field instrument for detecting postmodern definition fog disorder through definition discipline, evidence handling, reciprocity, institutional incentives, and ideological self-sealing. Answer each line quickly from 1 to 5. Do not try to game the pattern. Some lines are deliberately protective and reverse scored. 1-, not at all. 2-, a little. 3-, noticeably. 4-, a lot. 5-, totally. When I point out a contradiction in her argument, does she claim my definition of the terms was patriarchal or limited, rather than addressing the logic? I can state the other side's strongest case without caricature before I answer it. If she accuses me of being toxic for asserting a boundary, does she apply the same label to her own rigid boundary setting? Does she demand meritocracy for men, but equity of outcome for herself when results are unfavorable? When challenged on a definition, does she shift the goalposts by claiming the definition was patriarchal or limited? I can name the evidence that would make me revise or abandon my claim. I keep the same definition from the beginning of a debate to the end. Does she use HR or academic protocols to punish male dissent while claiming those same protocols are biased when applied to her? Does she use jargon, e.g. hegemony, performativity, to obscure simple truths and intimidate opponents? Does she dismiss objective data because it doesn't feel right or doesn't account for her perspective? If I deny her accusation, does she interpret my denial as proof of my gaslighting or toxicity? I can apply the same standard to my own side before I accuse the other side. I notice when my emotions are trying to outrank facts and I bring the discussion back to shared evidence. I apply the same moral standard to my side and to the people I criticize. Does she attribute her own desire for control to me, labeling my natural instincts as oppressive? When a dispute gets heated, I can pause, define the terms, and update my view if the evidence changes. I can notice a weak move in my own argument before I criticize it in someone else. I treat individual agency as real even when social pressure or institutions matter too. Does she demand emotional labor from me for ordinary social interactions? I prefer precise, ordinary language over status jargon when plain speech would do. Scoring key, maximum score, 100. Research thresholds, 76 or higher. Forward items, 1, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15, 19. Use the answer as the points. Protective reverse items, 2, 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 20. Convert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 before adding. Plain English. High agreement with a forward item raises the score. High agreement with a protective item lowers the score after decoding. 20-39. Low minor vibe infraction. The text shows stray mood law and soft accusation, but facts and definitions can still interrupt the performance. Vibe is modern slang for felt atmosphere. This band marks feeling trying, but not yet managing to replace judgment. 40-59, medium misdemeanor mood, prosecutor, the speaker begins prosecuting by atmosphere. Tone, discomfort, and social pressure start outranking evidence. Prosecutor comes from Latin prosequi, to pursue. Here the pursuit is moral pressure rather than truth. 60 to 75 High Felony Feelings Tribunal. The rhetoric treats disagreement as injury, dissent as guilt, and institutional coercion as emotional hygiene. Tribunal comes from Latin tribunus, a magistrate. This band is private feeling dressed up as public court. 76 to 100 Insufferable Supreme Court of the Sacred Tantrum. The argument is fully sealed. The verdict precedes the evidence. Moral panic writes the statute, and the accused is guilty for asking why. Tantrum is a modern word for an outburst. This band names outburst elevated into jurisprudence. Red pill, trivium debunk. Name the claim. The claim inside Dr. Winona's performance is not merely that someone was rude, insensitive, or institutionally clumsy. The claim is that subjective distress can overrule definition, evidence, proportion, and reciprocal standards. Postmodern definition fog disorder appears when a personal emotional state is converted into a public authority claim and then protected from examination by moral language. The first task is therefore naming. Once the pattern has a name, it stops floating around as atmosphere. The reader can point to it, test it, score it, and ask whether the same rule would be accepted if the sex, status, or political tribe were reversed. Define the words. The trivium begins with grammar. What do the words mean? The captured argument depends on elastic terms. Safety expands from physical protection to emotional comfort. Harm expands from injury to disagreement. Evidence shrinks from public facts to private feeling. Equity expands from fairness to managed outcomes. Definitions are not pedantry here. They are the lock on the courthouse door. If the accuser can change the meaning of the charge after every reply, the accused is not answering a claim, he is wrestling fog. The first red pill move is simple. Define the noun before obeying the command. Separate feeling from evidence. Feeling is real, but it is evidence of feeling. It is not automatically evidence of guilt, oppression, violence, danger, or institutional design. Dr. Winona's rhetoric tries to smuggle the conclusion into the bodily reaction. She felt unsafe, therefore someone made her unsafe. She felt diminished, therefore male power diminished her. She felt unheard, therefore the institution is guilty. The correction is not cruelty. A rational man can acknowledge distress without surrendering judgment. The proper sentence is, I believe you felt that. Now we must ask what happened, what it means, what evidence exists, what standard applies, and whether the standard would apply both ways. Find the hidden power move. The hidden power move is jurisdiction. The rhetoric asks the listener to hand authority to the person who refuses definition. Once discomfort governs policy, the most emotionally theatrical party controls the room. Once lived experience outranks evidence, the institution no longer adjudicates truth, it rewards performance. In this diagnosis, the recurring mechanisms are semantic fluidity and goalpost shifting. The refusal to hold definitions constant, allowing the subject to redefine terms to suit the immediate rhetorical advantage. Visible sign, using words like patriarchy, privilege, or violence as unfalsifiable catch-alls that expand to include any male action and contract to exclude female action. Fallacy, equivocation divided by li. Correction, define terms first. If violence means physical force, then emotional violence is a metaphor, not a literal equivalent. Hold to the definition. Standpoint, epistemic closure. The belief that one's subjective experience is superior to objective data, and that identity dictates truth. Visible sign, dismissing statistical evidence, e.g. crime rates, academic performance, because it doesn't feel right or doesn't account for my perspective. Fallacy, appeal to emotion dividing total absolutism. Correction, lived experience is testimony, not a throne. Data is the aggregate of experiences. Both are valid, but they measure different things. Projective identification and the Kafka trap. Attributing one's own flaws or desires to the male subject, then punishing him for exhibiting those exact traits. Visible sign, accusing a man of toxic masculinity for being assertive, while her own assertiveness is leadership. Denial of her accusation is proof of her point. Fallacy, Kafka trap, projection. Correction, observe the behavior, not the label. If she calls assertiveness toxic, then her assertiveness is also toxic. Apply the standard uniformly. Institutional gamma bias leverage, exploiting systemic asymmetries in law, HR, and academia to gain advantage while avoiding reciprocal accountability. Visible sign, using safe spaces to shield from criticism while demanding open dialogue for opponents. Using diversity to hire unqualified candidates while demanding merit for men. Fallacy, special pleading divided by double standard. Correction, merit and accountability must be sex neutral. If the rule applies to her, it applies to him. If it applies to him, it applies to her. These are not random errors. They are a system of escape hatches. When evidence appears, the claim retreats into feeling. When feeling is questioned, the claim retreats into history. When history is complicated, the claim retreats into safety. When safety is defined, the claim accuses definition itself of being harm. Test reciprocity. The sex swap test is the cleanest instrument. If a man used the same logic against a woman, would the institution honor it? If a junior man cried after a senior woman corrected his work, would the woman be disciplined for violence? If a man said, "My lived experience is evidence enough," would the tribunal suspend ordinary proof? If a man demanded safety from female disagreement, would he be treated as morally authoritative or emotionally immature? When the answer changes by sex, status, or tribe, the argument has failed. Reciprocity is not a trick, it is the beginning of justice. A standard that cannot bind its author is not a standard, it is a weapon. Return to first principles. First, principles restore order because they do not care who is fashionable this decade. Truth is not made by intensity. Justice is not one-way empathy. Responsibility is not oppression. Duty and authority must remain joined. Rights and reciprocal obligations must remain joined. A civilization cannot punish competence and then demand competence continue paying its bills. The strongest criteria in this diagnosis are: the subject exhibits a persistent pattern of redefining key terms, e.g. equality, justice, truth, in real time to accommodate shifting power dynamics, rendering consistent debate impossible. The subject claims lived experience as an unfalsifiable source of truth superior to empirical data, yet selectively applies this standard to dismiss inconvenient facts while embracing convenient ones. The subject employs Kafka traps, where any response from the male subject, silence, denial, explanation, is interpreted as confirmation of the subject's grievance or pathology. The subject demonstrates a neuropophyseal rigidity in her core ideological assumptions, e.g., male disposability, female victimhood, while exhibiting fluidity in her application of rules to herself. The subject utilizes emotional labor as a currency of debt, demanding compensation for ordinary social interactions and framing male neutrality as active aggression. The subject exhibits gamma bias in institutional settings, leveraging systemic protections, e.g. tenure, HR immunity, to shield herself from the consequences of her own misconduct or incompetence. The subject engages in projection by attributing her own desires for control, validation, or resources to the male subject, labeling his natural instincts as toxic or oppressive. The subject refuses to engage in sex swap tests, where the roles or genders are reversed to see if the same standard applies. If the standard does not hold, she dismisses the test as biased. The subject uses language capture to co-opt neutral terms, e.g. safety, respect, equity, and imbue them with specific ideological meanings that require compliance from the male subject. The subject exhibits a pathologizing tendency, framing male disagreement or dissent not as a difference of opinion, but as a sign of psychological deficit, fragility, or oppression. Each criterion is a drift away from natural order, from reality to feeling, from reciprocity to extraction, from law to mood, from speech to status, from fatherly standard to maternal indulgence. The correction is proportion, definition, evidence, due process, earned authority, and a refusal to let slogans replace judgment. The Socratic cross-examination. Use questions, not pleading. Ask, what exactly is the claim? What do the key words mean in ordinary language? What evidence would prove the claim false? Would the same standard apply if a man made the accusation? Who gains power if this definition is accepted? What duty does the accuser accept in return for the right being claimed? Is the proposed remedy proportionate to the actual harm? Does this produce more truth, justice, competence, and peace, or merely more institutional control? The Socratic method works because it makes the hidden premise stand under its own weight. Bad ideology hates definition because definition ends the spell. The natural order correction. The natural order correction is not emotional counter-screaming. It is disciplined refusal. Refuse the undefined charge. Refuse the one-way standard. Refuse the conversion of discomfort into jurisdiction. Refuse to treat male competence as suspicious merely because it frustrates a fragile ego. Then build the alternative. Male spaces with standards, institutions with due process, households with ordered duties, conversations with definitions, and a culture where evidence is not rude. The red pill DSM lens is useful only if it changes behavior. It teaches the reader to see the pattern early, name it calmly, score it accurately, and withdraw obedience from rhetorical traps. The decisive question remains. If every claim you make must be accepted as true because it is your lived experience, and every claim I make is suspect because it is objective data, then how do we know you are not merely projecting your own desires onto the world? And what evidence would convince you that you are wrong? Use postmodern definition fog disorder as a field instrument. Define the loaded word, score the pattern, separate feeling from evidence, and test whether the rule survives reciprocal application. Then return to natural order, plain definitions, one standard, real evidence, due process, earned authority, and duties matched to rights. That is how the diagnostic lens stops being a clever label and becomes a practical shield for the next tribunal, dinner table slogan, HR accusation, or media catechism. Sponsored book. The Patriarch's Guide, Raising Masculine Sons and Daughters in a Feminized World. I watched my grandson's first steps, not in a home I built, but in a daycare paid for by my pension. His mother, my daughter, was finding herself in Bali with her third husband while I changed diapers and dodged lectures about toxic masculinity from a teenager raised on TikTok therapists. This isn't the world I fought for. It's a daycare dystopia where grandfathers foot the bill for other people's mistakes, boys get medicated for playing tag, and girls think motherhood is a conspiracy. If you're holding this book, you've seen it too. The slow castration of everything strong, stable, and sacred. Your bloodline is being rewired by gender studies cultists. Your sacrifices are mocked as oppression. Your legacy, a grandson who can't fix a carburetor but can recite neo-pronouns in 7 languages. This isn't a therapy session, it's a war manual. I spent decades studying the rot, tracking how no-fault divorce laws turned fathers into ATMs, how schools swapped history for hysterics, and why 68% of young men now feel like society wants them neutered. Pew Research. 2023. The data doesn't lie. Boys raised by single moms face 400% higher felony rates, NIH. Granddaughters groomed by TikTok feminists are 64% more likely to see men as predators, Gallup. And every dollar you spend on spoiled heirs funds their contempt for you. But biology isn't woke. Testosterone still fuels ambition. Estrogen still craves nurturance. And grandfathers, real ones, still know how to fix what's broken. This book is for men who'd rather rebuild than whine. For patriarchs ready to weaponize evolutionary truth, torch the marriage plantation, and turn grandsons into leaders instead of baristas. You'll learn how to bypass indoctrination camps, public schools, dismantle alimony traps, and forge boys in the Iron Grandpa method, tested on Appalachian coal miners and Idaho militias with an 88% delinquency drop. You'll gut the transing industrial complex, reclaim daughters from the estrogen Reich, and discover why every egalitarian society collapses faster than a soy boy's bench press. Non-targets. Put this down. Snowflakes, simps, and anyone who thinks toxic masculinity includes fixing a leaky roof. This isn't your safe space. Go knit a uterus hat. For the rest, your genes are at war. The battlefield is your family. The clock's ticking. Let's march. The Patriarch's Guide, Raising Masculine Sons and Daughters in a Feminized World, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.